How's it going, everyone? It's Javi from Weather Sponge 5000, and in this video, we're of course going to monitor three possibilities we could see a tropical storm, where the National Hurricane Center has now outlined a new possibility right over the Gulf of Mexico. I was talking to you guys about this possibility yesterday. The National Hurricane Center didn't outline an area where there was a possibility just yet, but now the National Hurricane Center has been looking at the more recent computer models, and they've all been consistently showing that a more powerful tropical wave should move into the Gulf of Mexico by early next week. And there's, of course, certainly the possibility where the wind shear could be light enough for this to strengthen and potentially make landfall somewhere along the Gulf Coast as a hurricane. The chance is still currently low. We're definitely going to need to see the computer models shift their forecasts to where they actually want to develop a tropical storm, because we haven't really seen anything definitive just yet where a tropical cyclone forms in the Gulf of Mexico. But it's at least certainly a possibility with a strong tropical wave moving in, so definitely keep that in mind over the Gulf Coast. And of course, these are the next two disturbances we're keeping a close eye on right now, and unfortunately the National Hurricane Center has raised the chance that we could see a tropical storm within the next 7 days. And I definitely wouldn't be surprised if we continue to see this chance go even higher, to the point where we could see this go up to a moderate chance, because I'm getting the idea from the computer models that they want to develop this a little bit later than the 7-day time period the National Hurricane Center is going at. So I do expect this chance to rise, and both the European and the GFS model at least want to develop some sort of tropical cyclone, which means that most likely the chance is higher than what the National Hurricane Center is listing right now. But definitely keep tabs on this map over the next several days. And the reason why the computer models have been leaning a little bit more to tropical storm development as of recent is because there's a lot more moisture than the computer models initially anticipated for today, where we're seeing a lot more convective activity with this tropical wave, and we're gonna continue to see even more convective activity move over the main development region, where this first tropical wave would have a better shot of developing with more convective activity. And our second tropical disturbance is located right around this area, is just about to come off the West African coast. That's also it's also forecasted from the computer models that there should be more convective activity than usual. So unfortunately, I do believe that there is an enhanced risk that a tropical storm, at least one tropical storm, will form between these two tropical disturbances, and definitely two tropical storms is definitely within the realm of possibilities as well. Here's a look at the latest GFS model forecast, and it's definitely forecasting a more concerning scenario compared to the European model, because we do see as early as Friday, we see a pretty well-defined tropical storm right over the main development region. And not only that, we see it continue to gradually intensify easily to hurricane status as early as Sunday, August 20th. So within a couple of days from now, the GFS model wants to rapidly intensify this storm system, where we see the pressure continue to drop almost like major hurricane status. And in the more long-term future, it definitely could maybe become concerning for the United States. But look at the forecast hour I'm going at. This is very far out, so take this with a huge grain of salt. But even within a more manageable forecast time period between the next 7 days, we easily see the GFS model wanting to strengthen this into not only just a hurricane, but potentially close to major hurricane status, with its millibar pressure hovering around 975 millibars. And it seems, and the good news is that at least the GFS model wants to take this a little bit further northward. It expects just enough of a weakness in ridging thanks to this trough for this to move just north of the Caribbean islands, but definitely pay close attention to the ridging over the next several days, because it's far from certain it'll move this far up north. There could still be that possibility. It could come uncomfortably close to the Caribbean islands if this trough doesn't end up dipping down as much. Still, look at the forecast hour I'm going at. This is between 6 to 7 days out. So, of course, there's a lot of time for the GFS model to iron out the forecast to determine how much ridging there will be to determine the trajectory of this storm. But I'll make sure to keep you guys updated. But if this were to take a track further northward, we sort of see a pretty crazy scenario towards the United States where we not only see one hurricane close to the East Coast, but a second hurricane that develops out of the Gulf of Mexico where it's pretty strong, and we see both storms, at least in some way, shape, or form, impact the East Coast, especially the Northeast. But again, this is a fancy type scenario at the forecast hour I'm going at, so take that with a huge grain of salt. But it's definitely a little concerning to see the GFS model wanting to strengthen this potentially into a hurricane. But I'll still lean a little bit more to the European model scenario. The European model being the more reliable model this hurricane season, but don't rule out the GFS model, because I'll actually say, as of this recent run, the European model mimicked the GFS model a little bit more, because the GFS model, if you remember yesterday, was the one that wanted to develop this first tropical wave a lot more than the European model. And the European model today has leaned a little bit more to the idea that we will see this first tropical wave develop into a tropical storm. So we could potentially see this lean closer to the GFS model in this scenario, but it's still difficult to say. I'll still lean a little bit more to the European model's weaker approach, because the GFS model does tend to strengthen hurricanes a little bit too fast. But definitely, at least don't disregard this forecast either. What makes me believe we're going to see at the very least a tropical storm in the main development region by potentially as early as this weekend or into early next week is the fact that the European model now is leaning towards developing a tropical storm, at least between one of these two disturbances. Let's go to a 12Z run. Let's see the more short-term forecast. We see the European model wants to develop a decently sized tropical storm. However, it's definitely a lot weaker. It's definitely a weaker scenario than what the GFS model is forecasting, mainly because the European model does not expect a lot of moisture to surround this first tropical wave. We do see the dry air just becomes a bit too much for this small area of convective activity to handle, which is the reason why we don't see a hurricane out of this. So the next I'll say 48 hours will be key with this tropical disturbance, depending on how much convective activity it's able to attain, because if it attains it very early, then it's less likely that the dry air just to the north of it would be enough to completely dissipate this tropical cyclone, and we could potentially see this intensify a lot more than initially anticipated compared to past several runs. However, the good news is that, like the GFS model, the European model wants to take this potential tropical cyclone further northward thanks to a weakness in ridging. That's been the idea from the computer models over the past several days. But what's interesting is that the European model sort of wants to combine these two tropical disturbances, the first one and the second one, as we approach the early portion of next week. But we see the weakness in bridging steers us out to sea, and it's definitely a lot weaker than the GFS model scenario. So right now, I'll still lean slightly more to this taking a northward track to where it could miss the Caribbean islands, but don't rule out the possibility the ridging might be a little bit stronger than anticipated for this to move southward and maybe bring some impacts to the Caribbean islands by the early to mid portion of next week. So still keep this in mind throughout the Caribbean islands. You never know. As you know, the hurricane season and the forecast could change very quickly, but the key thing will be the amount of convective activity over the next 48 hours, as I wouldn't say we'll get a fairly reliable forecast until maybe the Friday timeframe. So definitely pay close attention to this over the next several days. But I will say that I'll lean a little bit more to at least one of these tropical storms disturbances developing into a tropical storm. And moving on to our potential of a Gulf Gulf of Mexico tropical storm. So the piece of moisture that I was talking to you guys about yesterday is really hasn't changed much when it comes to its structure. We see that this area of moisture does approach right around the Sunday, August 20th timeframe into the Gulf of Mexico. We see an enhanced amount of convective activity, but nothing really solid forms, not really a well-defined center of circulation. So I'll still say the chance is low for tropical storm development in the Gulf of Mexico, but look at the forecast that where I'm going at. Like I've been saying, we could easily see this forecast change if there's maybe a little bit more convective activity than usual from this tropical wave. Keep this in mind. And plus, the wind shear might be relatively light over this area of moisture. So even if it's relatively weak as it approaches the Gulf of Mexico, it could maybe at least develop just enough convection and have just enough outflow for this to intensify. Let me show you guys the upper level wind forecast, and we do see while there will be a decent amount of upper level winds just to the north of this tropical wave, we do see there's a small area where the wind shear is light, and this and the strong upper level winds you see just outside this tropical wave represent a very strong outflow and represents a pretty well ventilated tropical disturbance, which I believe will at least give this area of convective activity a possibility of developing. Whenever we see an area of convective activity over a lightly sheared environment, and of course over sea surface temperatures that are record breaking when it comes to warmth, there will always be that possibility, even if it may not have a ton of time to do so. There easily could be that possibility, but whether this develops or not, I do expect an enhanced amount of rainfall over potentially portions of Texas by the middle of next week, or Louisiana, which for some people might be good news. Portions of Texas have been in a drought over the past several days, so that would certainly be very good news, but it wouldn't be good news if we do see too much rain. So Texas and Louisiana still pay close attention to this, but I do at the very least believe there will be an enhanced amount of rainfall by the middle of next week, whether this develops into a tropical storm or not. And in terms of the upper level winds over these two potential disturbances, like I've been saying over the past several days, it's going to be over an area where the wind shear will be just light enough for this to have at least a possibility, and the upper level winds surrounding it should help the outflow and the ventilation of these two storm systems. The wind shear could increase as this moves further northward, which I do believe could inhibit this storm's intensity, but the GFS model certainly doesn't think the wind shear will be enough to deter it. So I think if this were to intensify, it'll be mainly due to the fact that it'll be able to fend off a lot of the dry air, because I think the wind shear will be just light enough, unfortunately, for these two disturbances to develop into a tropical storm. So here are the expected steering flows for these next few disturbances. We do see the ridge weakens right over the middle of the Atlantic thanks to this trough, and that should allow this storm to have an open area to move further northward. But depending on how strong this trough is will determine if this could move westward or if this will just move out to sea for the most part. Definitely pay very close attention to this over the next several days. This trough moving through the northeast by this weekend will be key. If it's stronger, expect these disturbances to move northward. If it's weaker, potentially expect this to move southward to impact the Caribbean islands. Definitely pay close attention to this over the next several days. Here's a look at the European ensemble members at this time, and we clearly do see when it comes to strength and trajectory, they're all over the place, which is the reason why I definitely wouldn't rule out impacts when it comes to a tropical cyclone moving through the Caribbean islands. We also could see the potential of another piece of moisture that could develop into a tropical cyclone and impact the Caribbean, but we do see a lot of them want to take this northward out to sea. And for the Gulf of Mexico, we do see some ensemble members wanting to take a tropical storm along the coast of Texas, but I'll still say most of them are just below tropical storm status, but they still bring an enhanced amount of rainfall by the middle of next week. So the Caribbean, you still need to pay close attention to the possibility of a tropical storm because you're not out of the woods just yet. A lot could change with the forecast. The GFS ensemble members are a little bit more all over the place. Definitely a lot different from what the main GFS model is stating. So I'll take these ensemble members with a little bit more of a grain of salt, because they're definitely, I'll say they're definitely very far when it comes to the accurate data that's associated with the main GFS model. We only see them wanting to take this second tropical cyclone out to sea and not really take any sort of hurricane like the main GFS model is stating. So take this with a little bit more of a grain of salt, but definitely be aware still throughout the Caribbean and the Gulf Coast for the potential of a tropical storm. So here's my forecast when it comes to the potential of a tropical storm developing. So I do believe there's at least a moderate chance of tropical storm formation between these two disturbances in the main development region. It seems like both of the main computer models are developing a tropical storm, but there's plenty of dry air too, which couldn't inhibit it. And the trajectory is still uncertain, but they're leaning a little, taking this northward of the Caribbean islands, which is certainly good news. But don't rule out a tropical storm in the Caribbean just yet. And for the Gulf Coast tropical storm, I'll still say a chance is low. We're definitely going to need to see the computer model show a little bit more intensification in the Gulf of Mexico for me to have a higher confidence that we're going to see a tropical storm. But still be aware of the possibility of enhanced rainfall along the Gulf Coast. But that's it for now, guys, and I thank you guys for watching.